Good afternoon. This is Monday. I think we're recording. As you know, as I explained last week, we are going away for 2 weeks. So I am actually going to be recording Chukat and Balak this week, today, within the next hour or so. I will record them separately, so you can listen to them when it's closer to the Parsha. But here we go. Parshat Chukat, I've named this one, Maintaining Our Trajectory and Moving On. Parshat Chukat, as we know, begins with one of the most difficult concepts to understand, namely that of the Parah Adumah. God speaks to Moshe and Aharon and says, Zot Chukat HaTorah asher tziva Hashem le'mor daber b'nei Yisrael v'yikru elecha Parah Adumah. This is the Chukat HaTorah. This is the paradigmatic Chuk of the Torah. And you should take the Parah Adumah and you should prepare it, a totally red-haired, unblemished cow, which has not worked. Now, we will read the details of this elaborate ceremony where the pure becomes impure and the impure becomes pure. How can that be? There's an elaborate discussion of how the priest immerses the garments, immerses his flesh, then they burn what remains. The priest is ritually impure until nightfall. And again, we want to be very clear that when we use the terms Tahor and Tamei, this has to do with a ritual status. It is not a matter of cleanliness. There's no taboos involved with this. It's strictly a ritual status that we're talking about. A ritually undefiled person, in other words, a pure person, must gather the cow's ashes and place them outside the camp in a ritually pure place. It will remain for the community of the Israelites as a keepsake. In other words, it will be a sign for them. There's lots of signs that we are seeing throughout this series of readings. The one who gathers the cow's ashes must immerse his garments in purifying water. Bigday, his bigadav, his clothes must be immersed with Tamei ad ha'erev, and he remains ritually impure until the evening. Now, we take note of the very next pasuk. Hanogea bamet l'chol nefesh adam v'tamei shivat yamim. We now begin to talk about one who comes into contact with the corpse of a human being, and that they are ritually impure for 7 days. We are again confronting the details of becoming Tamei, impure, through contact with a corpse, and the steps one must go to regain the status of Tahor, of cleanliness. Now we know this is not a taboo in the sense of the ancient world, because once someone had lost a status, they didn't have a way of regaining it. Here, every status is redeemable. Every status is something that, these are the steps where one loses one's status as Tahor, but these are the steps that one goes through to regain the status of Tahor. So let's think for a moment, and let's recall our discussion in Sefer VaYikra, in Parshat Tazria, regarding the woman who gives birth. And by giving birth, she becomes Tamei. One of the most powerful explanations that we discussed at that time was that after giving life, which is the most powerful experience one can have, the life force, upon being separated from the mother, leaves her incomplete, empty, if you will, in a way, and she needs to regain the status of completeness, here of being Tahor, of being ritually pure. At that point, we juxtaposed these terms of Tahor and Tamei as being complete, Tahor, or less than complete, Tamei, which is definitely a paradigm shift that we might want to recall in this discussion as we once again confront our familiar concepts, those of ritually pure, Tahor and Tamei, ritually impure. Remember, not a matter of cleanliness, not a matter of dirt or mud or filth, but strictly religiously determined states of being that allows one to participate in various religious rituals. That being said, how can it be that by contact and association with the Parah Adumah, which itself must be perfect, Temimah, perfect, according to Chazal, the status changes no matter what? This seems counterintuitive at most, and certainly paradoxical at least. This reaction seems to be anticipated, as we are taught strongly here that in terms of the laws, that we may not be able to make sense for ourselves. Nonetheless, Vayta lahem l'chukat olam. This is a chuk that is part of us, regardless of our level of understanding. Zot Chukat HaTorah. Thus, the Parah Adumah becomes the paradigmatic example of a law which we can't understand. The Netziv explains that, in fact, Moshe's Parah Adumah had a very specific quality that will not exist with any of the later ones that may be discovered, such as one that was reported several years ago. And we also have a teaching in Kabbalah or in our Hasidic tradition that the 10th Parah Adumah will bring the Mashiach. In addition to the normal function of the parah, which was classified as a chuk, the first Parah Adumah had the additional function of atoning for the sin of the ego masecha, of the golden calf. As the Midrash states, let the Parah Adumah come and clean up the mess of the ego hazaha, or the ego masecha. This was relevant specifically for that first time for the Jewish people who had, in fact, not so long ago, worshipped that ego. Now, as we notice the transition from the ceremony of a Parah Adumah to the next pasuk, talking about a corpse, it is significant that in this parsha, we will also mourn the death of two of our leaders, Miriam and Aaron. We learn as follows in Perek Chaf 20, "V'yavo b'nei Yisrael kol ha'edam midbar tzum, b'chodesh harishon v'yeshav ha'am b'kodesh, v'tamat sham Miriam v'tikaber sham." The entire community of the Israelites arrived at the desert of Tzin in the first month. The people stayed there in Kadesh. Miriam dies there and is buried there. The complete community, for those who were to die in the desert, had already died. And these were going to move on to life. We know that there are two different generations in Bamidbar. That's why we have that census at the beginning and then that census at the end. They're two separate generations. So I want to suggest that there is so much sadness here. There's so much death. Given what we just read, how were these people able to move on? In a time where we are all so conscious of and sensitive to post-traumatic stress syndrome, clearly there's PTSD here, or ongoing stress. Let's think about this. We in our lives today are surrounded by so much pain, so much destruction, so much death, so much misuse and abuse of leadership. Sometimes it's hard to breathe, but we must go on. This is exactly what we do. Rashi teaches as follows. Tamat sham Miriam. Miriam died there. Why is the death of Miriam stated next to the passage regarding the red, the Egel Zahav, the Parah Adumah, the red Parah? To tell you that just as sacrifice provides atonement, so too does the death of the righteous. In the Babylonian Talmud, in Masechet Moed Katan, we learn that Tamacha, Miriam died there. She also died with a divine kiss from Hashem, as did Moshe and Aharon. Why then does it not state about her, Al Pi Hashem, by the mouth of God? Because it says such an expression here is not respectful. But we know that it's so. Miriam dies, and now there's a problem. The community has no water. Remember, the well of Miriam that's associated with her is what provided water. So they assemble against Moshe and Aaron. We see this a lot in Bamidbar. They come in rebellion against them. We learn here that for the entire 40 years until this point, which is towards the end of their sojourn in the desert, they did have water in the merit of Miriam, but now it is no longer there. So, they argue with Moshe and they say, why didn't we die the way our brothers died? This is just no good. This is just not the way to be. And there's a problem here. Because again, we're seeing they're stuck. They can't see a way forward. And we understand it. But again, is that losing faith in God? Is that being so wrapped up, as we as humans do all the time, in our own trauma and in our own experience and in our own limited vision, that we don't see God's greater plan, of which, by the way, these folks are part? And they continue. Why have you brought this group to the desert, El HaMidbar? And we're going to say a lot about that in the coming weeks. The Midbar, the desert, a place where it's wilderness, it's not tainted by a lot of things of the world. It's a place that can be devastation. It's a place that can be birth. It's a place that can be rethinking. We've spoken about that, and we will continue to do so. Why have you taken us out of Egypt to this evil place? It does not hold any potential for us. Despair is reigning at this point. Again, as human beings, reading this narrative of other human beings, we can totally understand this. Water, the very sign of life, equated with no less than Torah, is nowhere to be found at this point. Here, the Bnei Yisrael are feeling the emptiness, the vastness of the wilderness, not its potential. They're abandoned by Miriam. They're abandoned by vegetation. They don't have water. And in their minds, where is God? Let's stop and consider for a moment. When one is overcome by grief, by too much suffering, by too much loss, how do we go on? And yet, there's more to come, much more. And at this point, somehow, Moshe and Aharon are holding on. We read in verse 6 of chapter 20, Moshe and Aharon moved away from the assembly to the tent of the meeting. And what did they do? They knew God was there. They did not stop seeing the Shekhinah in the Mishkan. They did not stop seeing the presence of God in and amongst them. And they were awed. They were fearful. They fell on their faces. And then the glory of God appears to them. Through the battles with other people and their losses within and despair all around, as if this is not enough, we now are going to read about Aharon's death. They go out from Kadesh, where Miriam has died, and God says to Moshe and Aharon at this point, verse 24, V'yasof Aharon el amav ki lo yavo el haaretz asher natati libnei Yisrael asher meritam et pi limi meriva. Aharon will be gathered to his people. He will not enter the land that I've given to the Israelites, because you have defied my word. at the water of contention. B'mei Meriva. Take Aharon and his son Eliezer, bring them up to Mount Hor, strip Aharon of his garments, dress his son. And again, remember, Moshe has his very ambivalent feelings that Aharon is the Kohen HaGadol, that Moshe got the position he got, but he really wanted that one. But that's what he got. Korach, dissimilar to that. Everybody wants something that they don't have, apparently. But Moshe continues to act as a leader should, regardless of his own personal angst. V'yas Moshe kasher tzivah Hashem, v'yalu ahar le'inei kol ha'ida. Moshe did exactly as God commanded. They go up to Mount Hor in the presence of the entire community. That's really important, that this entire community is repeatedly mentioned as being here, as witnessing all of this. Now, imagine how difficult this was for Moshe, and yet he did as he was told. And we have the refrain at this point, Vayta lahem l'chukat olam. And this was a chukah. This was a chuk also that perhaps was not understood. Moshe stripped Aharon of his garments, he dressed his son Eleazar, and Aharon died, Vayamat Aharon sham barosh hahar vayar Moshe va'Eleazar min har. Vayaru kol ha'ida ki ra'a Aharon vayibchu et Aharon 30 yom kol bet Yisrael. Moshe strips Aharon of his garments, dresses his son Eleazar, and when he finishes his task, Aharon dies there on the top of the mountain. The entire community, again, sees that Aharon has died. The entire house of Israel, the entirety of the community, wept for 30 days. And we learn in our Dinei of Lut, our laws of mourning, that this 30-day period comes from this text. This is the first time we see it. What a difficult, challenging, and upsetting parsha, aptly named for those laws we do not understand. But God commands us anyway. How do we bring these elements together? This juxtaposition of life and death, of being overcome and not being able to move on and yet commanded to do so, the transition between Tamei and Tahor, all of these elements are part of our trajectory on which we are all found. It is difficult, and yet it is normative. We are stopped in our tracks, and yet we keep moving. This may be one of the most difficult aspects of our lives, if not the quintessential roadblock for us. Nonetheless, as our ancestors did so long ago, we must remember, status will change, people will leave us, and yet we are commanded to live, no matter how hard. Our mitzvot, all of them, including the chukim, that are so difficult and that we may not understand, chai bahem, we are told. You live by them. You live by them and you live in them and you live for them. This is where our faith and our understanding of God in our lives comes to sustain us. May it be that we all continue to garner strength and are able to move on, even when, especially when, the roadblocks in our way may seem, and indeed be, insurmountable. That, to me, is part of the meaning. And this will be your chuk forever. This will be your challenge forever. These will be laws that God gives you that you will follow forever. I wish you all a wonderful week. A very, very, very early Shabbat Shalom, even too early for the Chabadniks amongst us. And in a few moments, I will also record Parshat Balak. I invite you again to store them, bookmark them, listen to them when you're closer to the week. And I wish you all, may you survive and thrive in this heat that we're having in the eastern part of the United States and wherever else you may be. And keep learning and keep moving and keep gathering strength from each other and from your faith in God. Lihitraot.